You are now tuned in to the Worldwide Underground, episode number 9. I'm your host and producer, Gabriel Teodros, and today my guest is Malkia Devich-Cyril, an activist, writer, and public speaker on issues of digital rights, narrative power, black liberation, and collective grief. I first met Malkia around 15 years ago over at the Magnet conference that was Media Action Grassroots Network. Malkia was representing an organization that they helped found called Media Justice, and I learned in this interview that Malkia is actually one of the people who helped coin the term Media Justice back in 2002. And they went on to declare that a significant goal of the Media Justice movement is to fight for a future where we are all connected, represented, and free. You know, this entire podcast since the beginning has been about a war of stories that we are all engaged in, whether we acknowledge it or not. I believe this episode gets right to the heart of the matter. I want to thank Malkia for all of their brilliant insights, being so generous with their time. As this podcast episode releases, Ijoma and myself are still on tour. For Ijoma's new book, Be a Revolution, be sure to pick that up in your local independent bookshop. You can order it online. You can also go back to last week's episode and check out my conversation with Ijoma about that book. And check out all the previous episodes while you're at it, from Nikita Oliver to Kings to Marawi Garima to Belin Nahiwet, Derek Dizon, to the first episode that had a whole collage of voices. It's been a good ride. Oh, Saul Williams is on one of them, you know. I want to thank everyone for being here. I want to thank everyone for supporting this podcast. It's a completely independent endeavor. The best way to support is to sign on to gabrielteodros.substack.com. Just put your email address in the box, and you can also support at whatever level feels right to you. Got no other sponsorship, no advertising here. It's just people and stories, you know? So with no further ado, let's get to today's episode with Malkia. Appreciate y'all so much. This is the Worldwide Underground, and today I am joined by my friend Malkia Devich-Cyril. Thank you so much, Malkia, for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this conversation's been a long time coming. I think I first reached out to you maybe in December, and I wanted to talk to you specifically because we're in an age of mass. I mean, we've been in it, an age of mass misinformation. And when I think about media justice and what that means, you're one of the first people that I think of. So if it's all right with you, I wanted to talk a little bit about kind of how I first learned about media justice. And then I would, if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to hear, your history with it,
Mm-hmm.
So for me, coming into of age in Seattle in 1999. I was 18 years old, and that was the WTO protests. I talk about that time period a lot because it was so informative. And my group, 500 Years, we were a hip hop group that was in the middle of the protests, performing all year. I got a real like political education from the organizing that led up to that protest, and the concept of being your own media was really important,
Mm-hmm.
because we knew that they weren't going to tell the stories of what we were doing in the streets in that time period. And also, as an independent hip hop artist, um, this is also the era where like being your own record label, and not relying on the music industry to get your music out was also like very informative, and has informed my whole walk ever since. So I've always had this idea that we have to be our own media. And the other thing that was important that happened in 99, I think, that we were part of, actually, we performed at the opening, was the Independent Media Center. We performed at the opening of the very first one in 1999 in Seattle at the WTO protest. And that's kind of where my, like, you know, introduction to media justice comes from you being a Panther Cub. And I first met you with our dear friend, Rawa Hapte, may she rest in peace, and Karen Turing at the Media Action Grassroots Network Conference in DC many years ago. And you're someone who's just always inspired me. He's always been on point. And I was hoping we could talk about, yeah, your history with media justice.
Absolutely. Happy to do it.
Yeah, yeah. So where does it start for you? Yeah.
Where does it start? My mom's name was Janet Cyril. She was a founding member of the New York chapter of the Black Panther Party. And she was also an editor of the Panther paper,
Mm-hmm.
So I grew up within an analysis that the creation of ideas and writing and journalism was all part of a political strategy for justice, So
Mm-hmm.
this was something that I grew up, that was very central to my upbringing. I learned how to read at this bookstore in Harlem called Liberation Bookstore, sitting on the floor reading poems by Paul Laurence Dunbar. I went to a liberation school as a small person. Um, Everything about the way my mom raised my sister and I was all centered around this idea that culture, was a strategy for Black liberation.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that my relationship with the concept of media justice has been ongoing from birth. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and has been generational even. My grandmother was a
Mm-hmm.
teacher. She was also a member of the Anchorage Symphony Orchestra, the only Black woman in the Anchorage Symphony Orchestra, the first Black woman to graduate from Brooklyn College as a biochemist. This is, this idea, science, culture, ideas, very fluent in my family as a strategy for Black liberation.
Mm-hmm.
And then as I grew, I was a page at the library. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I worked for the Human Rights Commissioner in New York when I was 16 to write speeches. I was a poet, a spoken word
Yes.
poet. Everything about my life was just culture as a strategy, culture as a weapon, culture as a liberatory mechanism, culture as a means and vehicle for personal transformation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So when it came time for as an organizer, and I was working as a community organizer, working with homeless youth and homeless families, and we were trying to pass a measure in Oakland called Measure
Mm-hmm.
B,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just a 1% tax, trying to
Mm-hmm.
get some transportation, some more equitable transportation, but we couldn't do it. We
Mm.
couldn't pass, even though it was widely uh, desired, by the people. But
Right.
there was a narrative,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
that wasn't allowing. It was impacting the votes, and so we said, well, we're gonna have to somehow figure out how we get some editorials, in the paper.
Right.
And we didn't have at that time, no small nonprofit or small community organizer group had a communications person on staff. Nobody did that.
What year was this?
This was maybe, let's see, 19, well, let's call it, yeah, 99 maybe,
Okay.
2000.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Nobody had a communication staffer.
Right.
And
Right.
so, there I was, an organizer, like, all right, well, let me start writing some editorials. Let me learn how to write editorials. Let me
Mm.
learn how to teach editorial writing. Let me learn more about journalism. Let me learn more about strategic communication. So I just became unofficially the strategic communications director, if you will, at that
Mm-hmm.
organization. And we
Mm-hmm.
won, we won Measure B.
Mm-hmm.
And we started to work with the young people around identifying problematic narratives, meeting with meeting with editorial boards. We just began to incorporate media and media activism as part of our strategy. So it was no big brainer when We Interrupt This Message came to me and said, you know what? We would like to start a program that lives at the intersection of strategic communications and media activism that specifically is trying to transform harmful narratives of young people of color in California. Can you help us do that?
Mm-hmm.
And I said, okay, I don't know nothing about this, but
Mm.
I'm down to try.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
felt like my whole life had prepared me for that intersection. And
Mm-hmm.
so that's
Mm-hmm.
how I got started. We started the Youth Media Council. And the
Okay.
Youth Media Council was actually a council of organizations, youth organizations throughout California that were
Mm-hmm.
going to train and learn and meet with editorial boards, do media monitoring to challenge the harmful and criminalizing narratives about young people of color in California. We did that, but it
Nice.
grew, right?
Yeah.
As we were doing that, we were realizing, hey, I could train you all day on effective narratives, but I began to see that it's the structure. It was the structures of media that were
Mm-hmm.
disabling. They were making it hard for us to move our message through, no matter how strategic our
Right.
message was, no matter how sophisticated our message was. And so I started figuring out, oh well, what is this FCC? What is this thing,
Yes.
about what
Yes.
is Clear Channel? Let me find out.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what are some
Mm-hmm.
other ways we could get some news into the places that our young people are actually listening and paying attention? So
Right.
we did a campaign called Unplugged Clear Channel.
I
First it
love
was
it.
local, yeah. First it was
I didn't
local,
know that.
and then
Yeah.
it became national. A
Uh-huh.
national campaign to unplug Clear Channel, and
Wow.
we all over the country we looked at Clear Channel news radio
Mm-hmm.
outlets, and we
Mm-hmm.
challenged them on their licenses
Mm.
if they weren't meeting the public interest.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
we were trying to get black news
Yeah.
to be featured on these hip hop stations, but
Yeah.
at the same time we were trying to remove the licenses of the right
Mm-hmm.
wing stations. So
Mm-hmm.
we just did that.
That's amazing. Were there successes in that? In that?
Yeah. We were able to remove the license of one right wing station,
Okay.
and then we got you. I don't know if you know, but here in the Bay Area,
Mm-hmm.
there's something that Clear Channel started. I think now it's national, called the Black News Network,
Interesting.
and
Didn't know
that
that.
is a direct result of that time. You know,
Wow. Okay.
so I at the time I thought the successes were great. Now I see
Yeah.
that power always reorganizes itself to reify
Right.
itself.
Right.
So the victories we had then were undermined later, but they were
Mm-hmm.
victories at the time. And
Yeah.
we moved. I started to see, like, well, this is not a local issue; it's a national issue. And
Mm-hmm.
so, I started Media Justice, moved the Youth Media Council from a regional or statewide organization to become Media Justice, which was a national organization focused on structural change inside of the media and technological system. So
Mm-hmm.
that's how Media Justice became.
Wow. Yeah.
And I'll say the last thing is that the term media justice, we
Mm-hmm.
came to that in 2002, sitting with a group of brilliant media activists at the Highlander Center. Makani Temba was one of those
Mm.
people,
Mm-hmm.
um, and several other folks were there, and we were trying to think about how can we shift this media reform movement that was
Right.
so focused on what was going on in Washington D.C., so
Mm-hmm.
focused solely on policy. It
Mm-hmm.
was led by white men,
Mm-hmm.
really wasn't considering the interests of
Yeah.
black people, of poor people, of young people, so on and so forth. And we said, let's model this after the environmental justice movement. How they moved
Mm.
from environmental reform to environmental justice, young people and people of color came coming together to forge
Mm-hmm.
a new analysis. So we did that.
Mm-hmm.
We coined the term media justice at that gathering,
Wow.
and out of that, a whole sector emerged.
Wow. It- to be friends with you for like, I don't even know how long it's been, probably more than a decade,
Hmm.
and to have used the term media justice for much longer than that. I never knew that you were part of like the group that coined the term.
Oh,
That's
absolutely.
wild.
Yes.
That's wild. Uh, all right, there's so many different directions we could go from here. Um, okay, one thing I want to contextualize for people who may not know just about the Clear Channel piece, because I, for a long time, would teach whole workshops about this at the middle school, high school, and university level, where people, I basically like would go into these workshops um, and just ask the students. I would just come in with questions, and they wouldn't know me yet. This would be the first time I'm meeting them, and just ask them like, what's their favorite music, right? Most of the time they'd be like hip hop. All right, cool.
Right?
So who are some of your favorite rappers? You know, and nine times out of ten they would start listing rappers from the '90s, even though I'm doing this in the 2000s and the 2010s.
Mm,
And I'd be like, "Oh, that's interesting. Like you named artists that are your favorite artists in this genre that you listen to. That Pac and Biggie would come up a lot. Like some of them, like you're born after they passed away. So
mm,
what is it about music from back then that's different than now?" And like they would just go through and tell you everything that's wrong with music on the radio, and I'm like,
mm,
"Okay," and I'll be like, "Oh, that's interesting," and it was just questions, and then I would ask, what do you notice about the radio station? Like, do you ever listen to here in Seattle? We have a Cube 93. Every
mm-hmm,
city has a
mm-hmm.
radio station like a Cube 93. Like, what
That's
do you
right.
notice about this one radio station? I'm sure you've heard it, and they would tell you everything that's wrong with the radio station. They play the same five songs. And what are those songs about? And they're just about like money, power, violence, and sex, Like, oh, that's interesting, right? Have you ever heard of Clear Channel? Silence. Have you
That's
ever heard of
right.
iHeartMedia? Maybe, because
Mm-hmm,
Clear Channel got bought by iHeartMedia
mm-hmm,
later. And then I would break down how like this one corporation before, was it 1997? Like that's when the Telecommunications Act passed. They It was illegal for a corporation to own more than a set amount of radio stations in a market. But after that year, they took that limitation away, and one corporation could own as many media outlets as it wants. And in some cities they own all the radio stations, and they definitely own every one of those Cube 93. So that's why you're hearing the same playlist over and over again.
that's right.
We and then we can have a deeper conversation. So what does that mean for the news? What does that mean for your information? What is, and
Yes.
yeah, so that's cool that you were holding Clear Channel accountable. Um, it's interesting now because having that conversation now is completely different with the internet, and that being the place where people listen to music. And I feel like just so much has changed in the last 20 years, and even a lot of the language that we've used about media justice, I feel like has been co-opted by the right wing, to be frank. Like, like Donald Trump is saying don't trust the media, and for it's all the wrong reasons. And yeah, I'm just wondering like what are your thoughts with the language being co-opted by the right, of like
Mm.
things that we used to say about, the reasons we can't trust the media because it's not telling our story, it's not telling the full story, it's dehumanizing whole, groups of people like we're seeing currently with Israel Palestine. And then at
Mm-hmm.
the same time you have the right wing saying you can't trust the media for all these other, like what are your thoughts?
I mean, so first of all, we have this Telecommunications Act, right, that you mentioned,
Yeah,
signed in 1996 by a Democratic president, Bill Clinton.
that's right.
We know that you know that law was essentially bought and paid for by corporate media lobbies.
Mhm,
We know
mhm,
that that was true at the time, and this relationship between corporate power and right wing power is 100% intertwined.
mhm,
So the right wing and their culture wars, they stem from
mhm,
that same period of time. The
mm,
late '80s, the late 80s through the 90s was a period of intensifying culture, what we've called culture wars on the right, where
Mm.
the right wing attacked policies like affirmative action, attacked ethnic studies, bilingual education. Um, you know, Here's one thing that's true: while the media reform movement um, limited its understanding of media and technology to like journalism,
Mm-hmm.
and um, technology to some degree, the internet,
Yeah.
and its policy, right? The right has always understood that um, cultural strategy is much broader. And
Mm.
so they have focused in large measure on education, you know, both the
Mm-hmm.
universities and you know um, lower level education,
Yeah.
K through high school education, and this attempt, this work that they've done, to remove ethnic studies, to that's what it was then, to challenge ethnic studies, to transform the policies that would allow that were intended to bypass decades, centuries of discrimination and exclusion. Um, their whole premise is essentially, right, racism doesn't exist, no longer
Mm-hmm.
exists. If it
Mm-hmm.
ever did, it no
Mm-hmm.
longer exists, and therefore all of these policies, all of this effort on the part of communities of color and other people of conscience to create fairness is actually, that's what racism is, right? That's
Mm-hmm.
the shift. That's the essence of the culture war, to flip and
Mm-hmm.
what any narrative around equity and justice on its head, to make white people, men, and others in power appear as the victims of
Mm-hmm.
that conflict or that contradiction.
Mm-hmm.
So all of the strategies that we see today, the book banning,
Mm-hmm.
the attacks
Mm-hmm.
on Black history and curriculum, these are
Mm-hmm.
extensions of a strategy that was in the 80s and the 90s around affirmative action, ending affirmative action, um, and removing ethnic studies, and so on and so forth. I think it's important to say that this is a long-term strategy. This is an
Right.
extension of of segregation. This is an extension of Plessy versus Ferguson. This is an extension of the battle that we've been in around
Mm-hmm.
what the truth is, who gets to tell it, who gets to hear it, who gets to read, right? Who gets to learn how to
Yeah.
read, who has access to an education, who has access to information. It's important to note that, right? This is a part of a long term battle on the part of
Mm-hmm.
the right wing in America, and that the right wing in America is not an extreme, uh, uh, an extremist element that is on the side of America. It's at the heart of America, and
Mm-hmm.
that it's been a majority at various points in American history. So
Mm-hmm.
this is important, I think, to understand, because when we create movements or sectors or strategies that are intended to make media and journalism and technology more equitable, if we don't enter from that understanding that
Mm-hmm.
there is an ongoing, very explicit, very clear battle
Right.
to turn the truth on its head, then we
Right.
think disinformation is a strategy of an extremist an extremist group. It's not. It's inherent to the way power has been structured in the United States
Mm-hmm.
from its inception to today.
Absolutely.
Only a small set of people are intended to rule,
Yeah.
and everyone else has to fight for basic access to cultural literacy, to
Mm-hmm.
education, to news and information, to technological access, so on and so forth. So that's when I think about the right, and I think about the right usurping the language of the left, or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
usurping the language of civil rights,
Yeah.
usurping the concepts of racial justice, and turning them on its head.
Mm-hmm.
This is all part of a very profound and long-term cultural strategy to retain white power. And I think
Yeah.
it's important that we understand that.
Yeah. That's man, thank you. Thank you for that. That's
Mm.
real. Um I'm thinking about all of this in the era of social media and how much social media has completely changed the way we think of media, right? And and actually one of the moments that made me want to have this conversation with you now was it's a couple weeks ago now, but Instagram kicking off Sean King for uplifting Palestine. And I know
Hmm.
Sean King, like people have a lot of mixed feelings about him, and
But it doesn't
I
matter
don't want
what
to.
we think about
It
Sean
doesn't
King.
matter.
It's not
Like
relevant.
I don't want to get into any of that because
Mm-mm.
that's not the point. Like
It's not.
what they did to him, they can and will do to all of us, right? And for people that don't know, Sean King had I don't remember how many followers on Instagram. Was it 7 million? It was a big number, and he has been very consistent with uplifting uh, stories from Palestine and uplifting Palestinian voices, and um, and they banned him and kicked him off the account. Kicked him off of Instagram completely. And I believe his last post, the one that they banned him for, was was about Yemen, and this is before the U.S. started bombing Yemen.
Absolutely.
This was like a week before, um, and Yemen hadn't killed anyone. They just simply stopped ships that were
Exactly.
carrying equipment into Israel, which is currently committing a genocide, from passing through the water. And he commended them on it, and Instagram took his account off, you know? And it's such a big moment. And I feel like because people feel however they feel about Sean King, they didn't look at the underlying implications of what that means for all of us on these online platforms. And it reminded me of another online platform that's a relic from back in the day, which is MySpace.
Mm.
Just personally, um, I was an early adopter to MySpace music, and I owe that website for a lot of my early successes and even having a career in music.
Mm.
Um, just because I was on it when I was. I wasn't a person that would spam people, and I didn't
Yeah.
even like use MySpace in the way that anyone uses social media now. But since I was on when I was on, like I had a really big following, and over the course of a few years, like I can't remember if it was 50 to 70,000 people that I had a connection with. And
Wow.
then one day MySpace went out, and I never had that connection again, right? So
Yes.
when we put our entire way of communicating with each other on these platforms that we don't control, it's like they can turn the lights off in a minute, and there's just no recourse. So yeah, I
You,
wanted to get your thoughts on that, and
yeah.
just ask, like, where do we go from here? How do we move through this,
I mean, it's interesting because there's so many things that you're bringing up. Let's take them piece by piece. So
Okay.
number one, you know, part of how power works is it will attack what it perceives as a weak link or someone easy to discredit, someone who has a
Uh-huh.
lot of who's very effective but also controversial. Right? This is a an old playbook. This there's
Mhm.
nothing innovative about this. But unfortunately, a lot of activists, they're activists. They're disconnected from any particular organization. They've been activated and mobilized via social media, which on social media, anybody can be anybody. You can get famous on social media without having ever done anything. You
Right.
know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
all you're doing is talking, and that's great. But so basically, what I'm saying is that people look at Sean King, for better or worse, whatever his controversy is, they
Mhm.
don't understand. They're activists, okay? They don't understand that he's not just an individual. He represents a network of resources, of infrastructure, that is moving behind a particular set of issues. He
Mhm.
not only represents a platform with a lot of followers, but there's a lot of other stuff behind. He wasn't just uplifting stories. He sent resources to Palestine. He did
Right.
a lot, right?
Right.
He did a lot as it relates to Palestine. And so if you're a strategist and if you're a member of the movement, you're going to take that into consideration. You're going to think about
Mm-hmm.
that. Now, my disappointment, my great and grave disappointment, is that the media justice movement, the media
Mm-hmm.
reform movement, did not come out and say or do anything.
Right.
Who met with Meta to say this is unacceptable?
Mm-hmm.
Where were the protests and the calls for action from the sector that I helped to build, that is responsible for dealing with moments just like this?
Mm-hmm.
I am extraordinarily disappointed
Mm.
in many of the institutions that represent the media reform and justice sector in terms of how they have responded to this moment in this genocide in Palestine.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
very, very upset. I want to know who is taking on Meta and their wanton discrimination against pro-Palestinian accounts. They're
Mm-hmm.
wanton censorship of pro-Palestinian messages. This is
Mm-hmm.
something that they're the way that they've been dealing with and messing with the accounts of the journalists in Palestine. The
Yes.
fact that so many Palestinian journalists have been murdered, and yet only international
Yeah.
organizations have been speaking out about this.
Mm-hmm.
This is a consequence of neoliberalism. This is
Mm.
a consequence of a movement, a media movement that is steeped in a certain kind and understanding of neoliberal democracy. It is a democracy that is not by the people for the people, it's by the person for the person. You feel me? It's
Mm-hmm.
individualized. And so the kinds of policies that this sector is has tended to fight for are policies that assist individual um, amplification. That when we think about, like, we always talk about how the internet has decentralized communications. Well, it hasn't, though. It's
Mm.
decentralized voices while centralizing and consolidating power. It has not decentralized power, as we've discussed,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
as we sometimes say it has. It's
Mm-hmm.
actually centralized and consolidated corporate power. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? While at the
Absolutely.
same time making it appear that voices have been decentralized. This is a trick. This is a
Mm-hmm.
tricky. This is a. We have to understand this as it truly is and not as it appears. We have to
Right.
understand that the telecommunications lobby is the second most powerful and second most powerful lobby in Congress. That you know that it's right up there with the oil lobby. Like, we have to really understand that
Mm-hmm.
what started out as um, a, 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 um, what started out as a movement of the people is now an incumbent movement. You feel me? Is now, um, I think, in large measure, a movement that is very much guided by the politics and the policies of the ruling class. So
Right.
that's why, you know, one, many of the organizations that I used to consider allies
Mm.
have
Mm-hmm.
not come out in any way and said or done almost anything. They might
Right.
point to a text, excuse me, a tweet here or there, a post here or there, but in
Mm-hmm.
terms of an organized effort, have done very little. That's why
Mm-hmm.
I'm proud of Media Justice, because Media Justice went to DC to
Mm.
actively engage in protest and engage in civil disobedience. But uh, very few organizations in our cipher have done that. So that's
Right.
one piece, right?
Mm-hmm.
The need for a direct confrontation of these social platforms in this time is real, it's
Mm-hmm.
profound, it's urgent, and it's not
Yeah.
happening. It's not
Right.
happening. So that's one thing. The other piece that I want to address is, this question of, you know, uh, And so because there's not, this is a litmus test, right, of the left. Does the
Mm-hmm.
left have the power to constrain uh, the influence of corporate media and right wing politics, right? What
Mm-hmm.
we've seen is it does not at this time,
Right.
right?
Right.
The left does not have the power and the strength to constrain the power of the right and of corporate media. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something that we need to learn from. There are
Mm-hmm.
some things
Mm-hmm.
we need to build. There's some areas of our work that need to strengthen.
Yeah.
Specifically, during the time that we were building the sector, we really spent a lot of time reaching out to and engaging with, the criminal justice sector, the folks who
Mm-hmm.
was working on housing and homelessness, folks who were
Mm-hmm.
working on domestic violence, folks who were working on the land back movement.
Yeah.
Some of that has been lost in this time.
Mm-hmm.
So in
Mm-hmm.
terms of the media reform and justice sector, they're not connecting in the ways that we used to with
Mm-hmm.
these other elements, other places where justice and injustice are intersecting.
Yeah.
This is a problem.
Yeah.
This is a problem. The sector, the media, justice, and reform sector is not playing its position, and
Mm-hmm.
it needs to. And
Mm-hmm.
part of that is because of the need to strengthen the left, but the other part is because the power, the censorship that has
Yes.
emerged is profound. The fear of being attacked, of being canceled, of being fired, of being
Yeah. Yeah.
fired is real. We've
Yeah.
seen we saw in the news the agent of Ava DuVernay, who's also, by the way, the agent of Tom Cruise, be
Right.
fired from her position, demoted from her role
Wow.
as a result of
Wow.
a retweet related to Palestine,
Right.
pro Palestine retweet. We've seen
Right.
it again and again and again. We've seen journalists fired and constrained, demoted. We've seen
Mm-hmm.
this actors and actresses, all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of people. Now, as the
Mm-hmm.
war has, as the siege has gone on, it's
Yeah.
become more and more acceptable to oppose it. So I guess what I'm saying here is that the power of the right, the rise of authoritarianism, the rise of fascism, it's showing itself.
It sure
And this
is.
power imbalance is something that we have to take very seriously. We have to correct, and we also cannot rely on our old allies to do it.
Yeah. That's real. That's real. I think I still have questions about. Okay, here's a simple one.
Come
Like
on.
defining corporate media. Do we include Facebook, Meta, all of that in corporate media?
I would absolutely. I mean, what
Yeah.
media is in this day and age is maybe seems a bit amorphous, but let's just call
Right.
it media and tech. Let's say that is
Yeah.
one arena. And
Mm-hmm.
there's a challenge, right? These platforms don't want to be included. They don't want to be guided by the laws that guide journalism. They don't want to be constrained
Right.
by those laws, by the First Amendment, but they
Mm-hmm.
want the benefits of being a platform, publishing platform. So they
Right.
want the financial benefits of being a publishing platform, but they don't want the political constraints or constitutional constraints of being a journalistic outlet.
Mm-hmm.
Right? They want the best of both worlds. They want to do and say whatever they want, and they want to get as much money as possible. But they are
Yeah.
still media outlets. They are still
Mm-hmm.
outlets.
Mm-hmm.
And so yes, social platforms. I like to say media and social platforms. That's how or news and social platforms. They're all media.
Yeah.
News and social media. They're all media.
Yeah.
They're not different. They used to seem different, but they're not different.
Right.
They're exactly the same. The New York Times has is on the web.
Of course. Yeah.
The web is infrastructure, but the platform itself, it is the New York Times. It's no longer something separate as it once may have seemed. It is the New
Mm-hmm.
York Times. Meta isn't just it's a company. It has
Right.
many aspects of that company, and it lives on this platform. So the platform is Meta. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
That distinction between platform and company doesn't exist anymore.
Right. Right. So the thing I keep running up against in my mind is where do we go from here? Because I think a lot of us haven't made that distinction between the social media platform being an extension of like corporate media because we feed it our content, like we feed it our stories day in and day out. So we feel like a ownership over our account and our content, but it's really this corporation that is censoring, is quietly censoring, or is out loud, just outright like taking people's accounts away. What I keep coming up against is where do we go from here as storytellers, as people involved in the media, in this era where like everything is going to social media, everything is going to online, and we even have um like newspapers shuttering, around the country. Like we
Hmm.
talk about New York Times and Washington Post a lot, but I mean, Seattle used to have two newspapers and two weekly arts alternatives, and now we're down to one. And we used to have different magazines that had free distribution, and now those are all gone. Like like print journalism is going out, and yeah, I just keep coming up against like these same kind of thoughts. Like, what does it look like when we control the platform, but how do we get the alternative to look as cool and be as enticing and as popular as the mainstream ones? Like, yeah, I just have questions about where do we go? Like, if we all go the way of Sean King and we get censored and kicked off, like, yeah, I don't know. I'm at a loss, so I'm seeking guidance and just wondering what your thoughts are, if you're also feeling the same way.
I mean, I think that a lot of people are asking that question. How do we fight for a future where we're all connected, represented, and free? You know,
Yes.
Obviously, to achieve that, we're going to need a media and technology environment that fuels real justice, right? That fuels that freedom from oppression and that freedom to communicate. Inside of a neoliberal democracy, that's hard to get, and
Word.
especially inside of growing fascism, we're going to find ourselves faced with new challenges.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to have to do a real analysis of power, first of all, and really
Mm-hmm.
understand where media and technology power is today. You know, um, the shift from uh, um, print and broadcast, moving into telecom and cable, right? Moving into tech and social. There have been some significant shifts both in the capacities, right, of the technologies itself, and
Mm-hmm.
also what that means about how we relate to those technologies legally, ethically. You feel me?
Mm-hmm.
Um, so first off, I think we need to better understand the true relationship that we have to media and technology. We need to understand, for example, that most places in the United States no longer have a local news outlet.
Right.
you know we need to understand that that's not some random issue that doesn't affect us. It has an extraordinary impact on local politics.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Nobody's at the city hall meeting. You
Right.
know what I mean?
Right.
Nobody's at the city council meeting to cover that. There is an impact on elections, on engagement at the local level to people in politics. So that's one thing we need to better understand. We
Mm-hmm.
need to fight for local journalism.
That's
We
right.
need to find new ways to fund local media, local journalism. See, this is part of the
Mm-hmm.
issue because we put journalism, and this is a too controversial a way to say it, but I'll just say on an auction block, right, out on the stock
Mm-hmm.
market. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It means that it meant that it was very easy to decimate. Number one, and number two, that there's no national obligation around ensuring that journalism exists. Now, there's all kinds of ways people have been thinking about how to fund journalism. Obviously, many countries all around the world have national media, right? Even the BBC is a national outlet. Now, there's issues with that, right? You don't want the government um, uh, being one complete funder or even the majority funder for a news outlet because then government positions may get overrepresented. That said, taxes, you know, in England, for example, taxes are actually used to help pay for the BBC. Now, that's something in
Mm.
America nobody would ever consider using taxes to pay for journalism because it's not considered an essential need, but it is an
Right.
essential need. So, finding new
Right.
ways to pay that does not rely upon corporate money, that does not make
Right.
us wholly reliant upon the power and resources of private corporations. This is a big direction that we need to go in. We need to find new ways
Mm-hmm.
to resource our journalism. Number two,
Mm.
or number three, I should say, there are a lot of laws that are not caught up with the technological environment. The First Amendment was written in, however many centuries ago, right? The First
Yeah. Yeah.
Amendment was written in an environment that could not even conceive of the kind of many to many relationship that technology allows right now. The speed,
Mm-hmm.
right, of information sharing, it could never have even imagined it. So we need an update. We need
Right.
a
Right.
constitutional update that
Mm.
has amendments that are align with this historical period. So this
Mm-hmm.
is another
Mm-hmm.
thing, right? We need algorithmic justice, right? We need
Whew.
laws that hold the AI world and work accountable.
Yeah.
There's so much, right, that we need
Yeah.
that is legal. But the biggest
Mm-hmm.
legal advance, I think, that would take us where you're talking about, right, that would allow us to go, is that we need some antitrust work. See, these companies,
Mm.
there's a saying, if the product is free, then the product is you, you know? So
Mm. Mm.
yeah.
Mm.
So if you on
Mm-hmm.
social media, you ain't paid nothing, and da 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 da, this free because Facebook. The story, even the movie about Facebook was like, oh, it's
Mm.
this college student. He started it as a book of faces to get in touch with other college students, to
Mm-hmm.
make friends. But it had nothing to do with friends or relationships. It had to do
Right.
with data.
Right.
These are
Mm-hmm.
data mining companies. They're not social media companies. And so,
Mm.
we have to
Mm.
understand them as data mining companies. This is an era of big data. Data is big data is big profit. And so
Yeah.
antitrust is really the only, I think, set of legal remedies that can break these big companies apart and
Can
create
you
at
can you
least the
break down
environment. Yeah.
can you break down what antitrust means?
I mean, I'm not an attorney. We're gonna have to get an
Yeah.
attorney in here to do that
Okay. Okay.
successfully. But
Yeah.
what I can say
Yeah.
is that antitrust legislation and legal and laws are they're laws that that are meant to stop activity that unreasonably restrains trade. Okay, that's the basic
Okay.
idea, right? So
Okay. Yeah.
antitrust is like it's considered anti trade or laws that prevent things that unreasonably restrain trade. This is why antitrust even is limited, right? Because it's all about
Mm-hmm.
saying, you know what, consolidation unreasonably restrains trade. It makes it so innovation is impossible, right? This is
Right.
all
Right.
under capitalism because it's going to lead me to my last remedy, which is a more extensive remedy.
Yes.
But
Nice.
underneath capitalism and neoliberalism, these are the legal remedies we have, right? You say
Right.
no.
Right.
This is going to make it so that actually innovation is impossible, and so we need these incumbent companies to be smaller, right? But
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then there's the whole question of corporate personhood and the laws that allow for corporate personhood, right?
Right.
Those laws
Right.
need to be overturned. And then
Mm-hmm.
there's the question of the economic base at all. Capitalism as an economic base will allow for this relationship between us as human beings and technology to continue exactly as it has. What we're seeing is the
Mm-hmm.
inevitable result of late stage capitalism, right? It
That's
will
right.
always be, it will just keep getting worse. It will get more
Yeah.
chaotic. We will see more disinformation, right? That we will see less official news and more information that's just shared in bubbles and silos, right? Because
Right.
that's
Right.
what late stage capitalism breeds. That's its
Mm,
inevitable cultural environment. It's that's its byproduct. So, in order to
mm,
prevent that, or in order to transform that, you're going to have a more significant conflict for a shifting of power. It's not going to
mm-hmm.
be enough to pass new laws, to
Right.
rethink the Constitution, or do any of that. You feel me? It's going to
Yeah.
require something nobody wants to see, but
Yeah.
it's a direction that we're heading in anyway. There are going to be
Yeah.
more and more conflicts between the powerless and the powerful. And
Mm,
the only prayer that I have is that the end result of those conflicts is a new economic base that supports justice for everybody.
yeah. I share that with you, you know? I share that same thought with you. Um, you mentioned you mentioned your days as a poet earlier,
Mm.
and I wanted to bring it back to that. I don't know if I ever told you, but I was at a bookstore one time, and I found an anthology of New Yorican poets, and I found you
Uh-huh.
in there. And I was like,
Allowed.
"Oh, that's the
Yeah.
homie." Yeah.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you, how important is art in all of your work that you do these days?
um, art is everything to me. It's
Mm-hmm.
what has allowed me to navigate the grief of losing my mother, the grief of losing my
Mm,
wife, the grief of losing friend after friend, colleague, comrade, cousin, aunties. Um, you know, we just talked about late stage capitalism. One of the truths is that mass loss is a feature, of late stage capitalism. If we don't have
mm,
poetry, if we don't have songs, if
mhm.
we don't have dance, if we don't have, visual art, if we don't have all of these things, this is how we translate the most unimaginable emotions into something someone can imagine, into this is
Mhm.
art is how we generate empathy. It's
Mhm.
how we co-envision a different future. You know what I'm saying? It's not entertainment. You know what I mean? It
Right.
might be
Right.
entertaining, but it's not entertainment. It is it's grief. Art is the
Mm.
manifestation of grief. And
Mhm.
people think that grief means sorrow, but it doesn't.
Mm.
Grief is any response to loss. That means it's
Mhm.
joy, it's loneliness, it's anger, it's
Mm.
sadness, it's every emotion
Yeah.
that, and not just emotions, but every action, every thought, everything we do that is in response to loss. And let me say that everything we do is in response to loss. Loss
Mm.
is what guides our every evolutionary step, you know?
Wow.
Loss of
Mm.
ability, loss of water, loss of life. Every loss is how we evolve. And so
Whew.
and art is the vehicle, is the medium for that evolution. So
Mm.
I that's how I think about art. And so I'm always I write a lot of poems. I've gone through long periods where writing has been harder for me. I'm
Mhm.
working on a book right now, and that's been really hard.
Yes.
It's
Mm.
hard because you have to sit with the truth, and then you have to tell the
Mhm.
truth.
Right.
And sometimes the truth is hard to tell. Some truths are very hard to tell. So
That's the truth.
yeah, right. So I've been
Yeah.
struggling with art, but I know in my soul how essential it is. And I told you that art was with me in the womb. Art was with me
Yeah.
before I could walk. It walked with me. It ran with me, and I'm still working with it today.
Yeah. I love it. That's so beautiful. I was gonna ask too, like, what's keeping you busy these days? Is the book the main thing?
I mean, yeah, that's a big, big thing that I'm working on. I also just
Nice.
wrapped up a Fascism 101 educational series,
Ooh.
attended by thousands of people. It was beautiful,
Mm.
wildly successful. Did that with the Highlander Center, with the Right to the City,
Dope.
um, um, folk, with the Linda Burnham, a veteran organizer, Ejaris Dixon.
Yes.
Yes, we love Ejaris, and so we did some beautiful work together. Working now on an anti-fascist futures gathering,
Dope.
that will come up in the next several months.
Dope.
Writing for different magazines and such, short form.
Mm-hmm.
Writing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, working, doing a lot of public speaking, working on just working on a bunch of different stuff, working to build some uh, um, um, organizer power building strategy centers across California, with organizers in this state. Um, so I'm just out here doing grief work, doing a lot of
Yeah, you are.
grief ceremony, uh, grief writing, doing doing a bunch of theory development around grief and social change.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I'm just out here really getting in where I fit in, wherever I can lend. I do a lot of stuff that's not work. I run something
Yeah.
called Pandemic Joy. So every
Yeah, it's
Sunday I
beautiful.
gather. Yeah, it's a beautiful space. We gather online. We sing, we meditate, we hear
Mm-hmm.
from people in our community who have something to teach us, come and testify.
Mm-hmm. It feels like church without the
Yeah,
trauma.
exactly. That's right. Church without the trauma. I love it. Yeah, we ain't. It's
Yeah.
non-religious. It's fully
Yeah.
secular, spiritual. In a way,
Yeah.
but it's
Yeah.
fully secular, and it's really about inspiration. It's an inspiration community.
Mm-hmm.
Just trying
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
survive all the stuff that we are facing these days. I do a freedom cleanse every month with a bunch of folks, about 50 people, and that's where we choose a few things that we're going to remove from our lives and some things we're going to add to our lives. I'm in it right
Mm.
now, working on my nutrition, working on
Okay.
organizing my life around writing. So that's the freedom
Yeah.
cleanse. And just,
Yeah.
basically every day I wake up and ask myself, how can I get free? What do I need
Mm-hmm.
to do to inspire and engage with my freedom today? And then I try to
Yeah.
see what answers me. Sometimes it's a
Uh.
new project. Sometimes, I need to talk to somebody on the phone. This is what's
Yeah.
answering today. This podcast right now is what I'm doing today.
Hey.
You know what I
Thank
mean?
you.
So yeah, it's just as long as we can ask ourselves that question every day and then turn and face whatever the answer is. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm trying
I
to do.
love it. That's
Yeah.
so powerful. You wake up every day and say, "What can I do today to get free?"
Yeah.
I
And
love
it's
that. I
hard.
love
Sometimes
that.
you just got to look yourself in the mirror and realize that, oh, there's some things I
Uh-huh.
need to change.
That's right.
But, if I'm going to be out here practicing that prefigurative politic, am
Uh-huh.
I ready for the future that I'm working
Yeah.
for? Would I
Yeah.
be, would I survive that future? What kind of person do I need to be to share my
Yeah.
last bit of water, to be the kind of person who, can travel on
Mm-hmm.
foot, to,
Mm-hmm.
all the things that you think, who do I need to be? Like, let me say this,
Yeah.
we've seen disasters around the world, but particularly in this country. And, whether it's a hurricane or earthquake or whatever it is, and
Mm-hmm.
in that moment of chaos, who'll be swooping in with gas and water? The right wing militias. See,
Damn.
I want the left, and not just the left, but just people of conscience and people who care about justice and equality. I want us to be able to swoop in with water,
Yeah.
with gas. Who do you need to be? If you live somewhere, do
Yeah.
you know the disaster plans for your neighborhood? Do you
Mm.
have a garden that could be shared? Is your life the kind of life that in the moment of need can provide for yourself and the people around you? Are you an
Right.
organizer every day?
Right.
Who do you need to
Right.
be? That's this question.
Yeah.
Freedom, people be like, oh, freedom, freedom, freedom. Like somehow that's just some esoteric, abstract future, something or other. I need to just
Mm-hmm.
be in self care. I need to go to the hot tub. That's how I need to get free. You know what I mean? Need to get a massage. Hey, I am not against that. Get you the hot tub, get you the massage. But at the end of the day, you know, freedom actually means, are we able to take responsibility for each other? Do we
That's
have
right.
the knowledge, the
That's right.
infrastructure, the capacity? So that's what I'm trying. I went to the range. I'm trying to learn how to shoot guns. I'm trying
Mm.
to learn gardening.
Yeah.
I'm trying to learn home improvement, things that I never
Yeah.
knew before, so that I can
Yeah.
actually be a part of a free society one day.
Yeah. That's real. I think I think we need to shift like collectively the way we think of self-care and
No
see
doubt.
community care as a part of self-care. You know what I mean? Like cuz it's
Absolutely.
a self is not an individual. Like
That's
a
right.
self is a part of a bigger collective no matter what. So how
We're
if the
part of an
collective isn't
organism. That's right.
yeah, if the individual can't be healthy when the entire organism is sick. So how do we,
Facts.
how do we
That's facts.
yeah,
That's absolutely. And
yeah.
the
I
fact of the
think
matter
about
is, if I'm satisfied and I'm happy and I'm in my bag and I got my whatever I need, but everyone around
mhm.
me is failing, is sick, is poor, doesn't have their
Ah,
essential needs
yeah.
met. The fact is, that's how the ruling class thrives. And
Mhm.
look, Fred Hampton told us, look, you got to remember, you got to remind yourself, I am the people, I'm not the pig. And so
Right.
that's the
Right.
same thing. We wake up every day, you got to remind yourself, this is not about just only
Mhm.
me. That's the ruling
Mhm.
class. That's the pig is the inner cop, the security force, right? That's out
Yeah,
here.
yeah.
If you're just trying to protect yourself, and that's all you're doing, which is what self care is, it's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
protective defensive mechanism. Then you're not
Mhm.
actually transforming. You're not
Mhm.
changing, and you're not creating the conditions for freedom. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
everybody would like to talk about healing. We gotta heal. We gotta
Mhm.
heal. We gotta heal. I'm like, yeah, but I want to be free. Like I want
Exactly.
my healing is my walk to freedom. Everything else is the
Mhm.
therapeutic model for healing, which is very
Mhm.
individualistic. That's not what I want for myself.
That's right.
You know.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. The to create the conditions where we all can heal is the
That's
thing,
right.
right? Like we
Hmm.
got to change the entire structure. I love that book. The Body Keeps the Score,
Yes,
but I
me
feel like a
too.
lot but I feel like a lot of people don't get to the epilogue where
Mm.
like the
Hmm.
I feel like the epilogue is like one of the most important chapters cuz he very specifically names that the entire society needs to change for us to
That's
heal
right.
from trauma.
That's
Like,
right. That's right.
yeah, if you've read that book but haven't read the epilogue, go to the epilogue
Go
right
to
now.
the epilogue. Read that first. Read that
Yeah.
first.
Yeah. Yeah. And
Absolutely.
then and then read the rest. I could talk to you all day, but I want to respect your time. At
Thank
some
you.
point I would love to have a more extended conversation with you about particularly about like being your mother's child because
Mm.
so often like because my dad's an activist too, and I feel like a
Hmm.
lot of times like as children of movement workers, like there's a there's a what's the word for it, a sense of resentment that can build when you feel like you had a parent that cared more about the movement than they cared about
Hmm.
and I mean, for me, that was like an outright rejection of Marxism when I was younger because that was my
Right.
dad's jam. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't even like. I didn't even want to look into it because that was his thing, you know?
Yep.
And then I realized like, oh no, he was actually onto something though. And I'd love to have a longer
Yeah.
conversation with you one day about what that meant for you. But I feel like that's gonna be a whole nother hour, you know. So,
Well, I'm here for that conversation. I definitely relate to what you're saying. It was different for me,
yeah.
I will say. Like
It sounds like it was.
it
Yeah.
was different for me in part because I was gay. You know,
Okay.
because I
Uh-huh.
was gay and I came out when I was 12, I
Uh-huh.
began my own activism around my own
Nice.
identity. And
Yeah.
it was a time when very few people were out. Like I was the only out person in my junior high school, the only out person in my high
Mm.
school. I had to fight a
Mm-hmm.
lot. I was attacked a lot physically.
Damn.
And so organizing with people, coming together with other queer folk, young people, became a
Yeah.
survival mechanism. It was also the only way
Mm.
for me to gain any kind of puberty and adolescence and way to kind of have my coming of age, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so organizing for my safety, and therefore also for my rights, became part of my social network. You see what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Not to
Mm-hmm.
mention that everybody I knew, every person that I knew, my mother's friends, I didn't know we weren't related, until I was an
Yeah.
adult. All of their
Yeah.
children, everybody was in the movement. So there wasn't even
Mm-hmm.
a how do you not be in the movement? Where would I go to not be in the movement? I didn't know nobody that
Right.
you know. And then the last thing that I'll say about this that I think is really interesting too is that my sister had other friends who were not in the movement. You know what I mean? So
Okay.
she had a
Uh-huh.
little bit more of that journey toward like having to come to terms with and decide for herself that this was the movement was a place she wanted to be and build. So but I really never, because I was gay. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
never had a period of being outside, but I'm going to tell you one story to wrap
Mm.
up that I thought was very, very indicative of me and my being my mother's child.
Mm-hmm.
So when I wrote I did my first chapbook, and it was
Nice.
published by Kitchen Table Press, and I was about 15, and I had
Wow,
my
you're
mom
so
had
young.
yes,
Wow.
and I had went. My mom had taken me, or maybe I was 14. My mom had taken me to the
Mm.
Medgar Evers Black Writers Conference. At Medgar Evers College.
Okay.
Barbara Smith was
Yeah.
speaking there, and she had, it was a Q&A. She dragged me to the front. She said, "Tell him you're a lesbian," and I was like, "No."
I
You
feel like
tripping?
it's such a parent thing to do. Like
And she was like, the mic is right there, so everybody can hear her. She's like, "Tell them you're a lesbian and you want to be a writer too." And I was like, "Well, you
uh,
already told them. They heard you. So anyway, I
right,
said it,
right.
I'm a lesbian and I want to be a writer too. And
Uh-huh.
afterwards, everybody laughed because it was funny to them. And that's how I
Yeah.
met Barbara Smith.
Nice.
I was then introduced to Audre Lorde. I began to,
Amazing.
have a bit of a mentorship relationship,
Oh
in
my
which,
God.
yeah, she put me
Wow.
through this Brooklyn Academy of Music residency. Me and my friend Nicole Breedlove, and then we performed at her I Am Your Sister conference in Boston, and then I
Wow. Wow.
performed at her funeral at St. John the Divine.
Wow.
And so this is, so all of this is
Wow.
happening, right? So somewhere in the midst of this, when Audrey was still alive,
Yeah.
and Kitchen
Yeah.
Table Press had published my chapbook, and we got a bunch of copies of it. And my mom
Mm.
sent me to Restoration Plaza in Brooklyn to sell the
Mm.
chapbooks for $1 a piece. And I
Mm.
sold about 1,000 chapbooks over a couple of days, and I had $1,000. Never had that much money in my life. Never even seen
Mm-hmm.
that much money in my life. All in like dollar bills,
Mm-hmm.
right? Some
Right,
people
right.
paid $5 for the chapbook, which was like
Mm-hmm.
crazy.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
"Mommy, I want to get some sneakers. I want to get a jacket. You know what I mean? Like I wasn't allowed to wear
Yeah.
any name brand clothes." I said, well,
Oh,
this
I
is
know
my
why
money
too.
though.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Uh-huh.
my money, so I could go get whatever I want. She said, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's not your money. I said, what you talking about? I went out and I sold the books. I wrote the book. And she said,
Right,
oh, you're
right.
confused. You're confused. You were given a gift. And the point of a gift is to give it. You have a
Ooh.
gift. So now you have to give it. So
Mm.
where you want to donate your money to? I had to
Wow.
donate all of the money to a women and children's
Wow.
shelter in Brooklyn.
Uh-huh.
I was
Uh-huh.
very upset, very angry, very
Yeah.
angry. But this is just
Yeah.
gives you an example of
Yeah.
the way life was as a child and as a teen. And
Yeah.
everything
Yeah.
was a lesson. And my mom was involved in it. She came out with me to sell them books. Like she was involved
Yeah.
in all of it. So it wasn't like a lot of my friends who was
Mm.
in the movement whose parents
Right.
went off and did the movement and they felt neglected or they felt forced or they felt all of that. That
Mm-hmm.
wasn't that wasn't my
Yeah.
my experience. You know what I mean?
Nice.
And
Yeah,
it
that's
was the
beautiful.
experience of most of the people I knew, most of the other movement
Right?
kids I know. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear the other story way more often than I hear yours,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
Yeah.
Me too.
Do you have a
Me too.
since you mentioned it, I had no idea that you and Audrey Lorde had like that kind of like relationship.
Yes.
You got a favorite Audrey story or
Oh,
like
I
a
I
memory?
mean,
She's like one of my heroes of all time. Like I love her so much. Like, you know, her
but what
writing
I
and
love
everything just
most
means the
about
world.
Audre Lorde is that she is real regular. Like she's not regular,
Wow.
she's a genius and she's
Mhm.
all of the things, but also she was kind of mean too.
Okay. Wow.
Not me, stern.
Okay.
And yeah, she wasn't like she I'll just leave it at that. I love,
Okay.
I love her, and it's not like we spent a whole lot of time together. I'm blessed that she
I
took
see.
some type of interest in me, um,
Mm.
and every time we were together, she was advising me.
Mhm. Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean. But the fact is, she did take an interest. She did make a way, for me to
Yeah.
be the poet that I am today, and the writer that I
Yeah.
am today. And I will never ever forget that.
That's so beautiful. That's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Um, is there is there anything you want to leave with the people? Is there ways they can connect with you and your work?
I'm out here on IG. I'm the Culture
Okay.
Jedi everywhere I go on
Yeah, I
fake
love it.
X. On Facebook. I'm always the Culture Jedi. And I
Love it.
I just I love to connect with people on around their grief work. I love to
Mm.
connect with people around and any work for Black liberation, for international solidarity. I'm here for it. So yeah, hit
Yeah.
hit me up on any of those social platforms and let's link. That's what I love to
I,
talk. I love to chat. I'm here
I
to make the
love it.
chit chat, as my wife used to say.
You're here to make the chit chat.
I'm here to make the
Thank you
chit
for
chat.
thank you for chit chatting here on this podcast and Worldwide Underground. Appreciate you so much. Love you so much. Um,
Love you.
yeah, and we will talk again soon.
Thank you once again to Malkia Devich-Cyril for being so generous with their time, their stories, their insights. I got a lot from that conversation, and I hope you did too. If you like this podcast, be sure to tell people about it, share it on all the socials, and make sure you're subscribed to GabrielTeodros.substack.com. This is completely people powered, y'all, and I want to keep it going. I'm giving it a year, and we're gonna see. We're gonna see if this is sustainable after 1 year. You know what I mean? We're what, 2, maybe 3 months in right now? All right. Hope you'll have a wonderful rest of your day. I made this beat too. Shout out to me on production. New album coming in 2024, y'all. You heard it here first. And it's a monster. From the Ashes of Our Homes, out right now. My old album is still a new album too. All right, I'm gonna be back with you soon. Appreciate y'all so much. It's GT signing out. Much love. Peace.